particular favor of chapter 3 because of this phenomenon of color. Let's listen to what George Seurat had to say. And then we're going to figure out who he was and why we should listen to him. Harmony is the analogy of contrary and of similar elements of tone, of color, and of line, conditioned by the dominant key and under the influence of a particular light in gay, calm, or sad combinations. We're going to reflect on this just for a few minutes. And there's some key words I think I want to point out. Harmony, of course. Analogy is another. Tone, key, and variety of combinations. All right, these are the ways that the element of color can be manipulated. And we're going to come back and read this again later after we know more about George Seurat. Okay, so bear with me a moment. Studying an image by Seurat called Sunday on La
Artist
Grande
Trio 9
Jatte.
presents A Sunday on La Grande Jatte by French painter Georges Seurat. The impressive oil on canvas painting, it measures over 200 by 300 centimeters, is also known as A Sunday Afternoon on the island of La Grande Jatte, or in French as Un Dimanche après-midi à l'île de la Grande Jatte. Seurat started working on this painting in 1884, but finished it in 1886. After Seurat's early death in 1891, at the age of 31, the painting was owned by first his mother, next his brother. It is said that Seurat's probable cause of death was an infectious disease, like infectious angina, meningitis, pneumonia.
Alana, can you see the video?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, just want to make sure. I'll continue.
Or diphtheria. For 1900, the painting was in hands of private owners. In 1926, the last owners had donated it to the Art Institute of Chicago. In this painting, Seurat depicted multiple people relaxing and animals playing in what seems to be a park bordering water. As the title explains, it actually concerns the island of La Grande Jatte, which is located in Paris, in the River de Seine. The lines on the canvas form an asymmetrical composition. A horizontal line is suggested along the coastline. If we draw a vertical line in the middle, along this central female figure, we can see that both sides are ordered differently. To me, several diagonals determine the perception of the painting most. What strikes me the most is a line that draws my eye from the lower left to the upper right, from the reclined man to the heads of the couple in the front. But we can indicate more diagonals. Yet Seurat probably used a way more thought-out division of the surface and a clever interplay of lines. According to the Art Institute of Chicago, Seurat's preparatory work involved numerous sketches, 28 drawings, 28 panels, and 3 larger canvases. If we draw a grid of, for example, 3 by 3, it makes sense Seurat could have used such a grid to arrange the composition. Looking at the painting, we can also perceive many parallel lines, for example, these diagonals. There's a certain rhythm, creating a sense of space and distance. Such a repetition is also visible in horizontals, and again in vertical lines. All these lines link the separate...
Okay, I'm going to pause it there for a few minutes because I want you to know that this is called a linear analysis. Okay? It's as if you take like a tracing paper overlay and you look for these kinds of implications, whether it's vertical line that are actually actual, or whether it's some of the diagonals that you see repeated at different angles. Does that make sense? That is what we call a linear analysis. And it helps you figure out how Seurat formed the composition, right? And it helps you figure out your eye movement throughout the composition. So just to kind of clarify, we've been doing this already. We've learned about implied line and we've learned about actual line. And now we're looking at a canvas that is very, very large, upwards of about 10 feet in width and about 7 to 8 feet in height. It's very, very large canvas, okay? So I want you to, perhaps we'll see it there in the Art Institute, and you can get an idea of the sheer scale of the piece. But while we are talking about form, how the artist developed it, I don't think as the art historian that's discussing this piece for us right now, I think you will agree, and I believe, that all of this was carefully orchestrated by Seurat. It's not accidental. There's too many rhythmic similarities, too many repeated verticals, too many repeated horizontals, too many repeated diagonals for it to have been just an explosion or an accident, right? 28 preliminary sketches. You know, he did a lot of homework on a smaller scale before he approached this large canvas. So it's just something I want you to think about as we continue.
Put figures in the suggested space. The sense of space is also created by using picture planes that sometimes overlap, but they mostly define distance by difference in size. The further the subject is removed from the viewer, the smaller it is depicted. The first plane depicts a declined man smoking a pipe, a standing couple, 2 dogs, and a monkey. Then on the left we can see a woman reading and a man gazing forward. Also 2 women are seated in the grass. Next there's a woman fishing, accompanied by a seated woman. In the center, a woman and a girl are holding hands. On the far right there are some unidentifiable parts, perhaps the skirt of another figure outside the frame. On the left, a man is playing a trumpet. In the center, a girl is running towards an object, might be a trash can. The next plane staged several figures, some trees, a fisherman on a boat, soldiers, a few boats and another dog. Parallel to the horizon, there's a coastline. Some buildings are vaguely visible. The last planes contain some foliage and the sky.
I'm going to stop again because what the historian has done here is now examine the element of space. Okay? First thing we talked about were all these directional lines, the forming of the composition using verticals and horizontals. It was kind of an irregular grid, actually, with a lot of diagonals. Now, we're talking about the element of space, which we haven't gotten to yet. That's in a later chapter, but we might as well learn about it now. As you can see in the purple, the dog, the major figures here, and the little monkey are all in the area of pictorial space that we call foreground, okay? And then we have in the midplane, the area that you see here in blue, in the darker blue, and in the kind of turquoise blue. That's called the middle ground. Foreground, middle ground, and then in the greens and the yellows above, we have what we call receding ground, right? Foreground, middle ground, receding ground. I think you need to make note of that. These levels of space, we call pictorial space. And those create what we know as the traditional Renaissance space, which is a window into a world that you can walk into, right? Can we understand this sense of space? Yes. We can actually imagine walking into and receding and weaving ourselves through all the way back out into the open, deep, infinite space. It would be almost like a little maze, right? So Seurat was very interested in establishing this kind of deep space. Foreground, middle ground, receding ground. That is what creates a sense of depth. You have to have all three levels, right? And certainly because this is outdoors and it's a landscape, we can actually get to the receding ground. Notice the horizon line is way high, okay? All right, now later in the textbook, we'll understand the methods that artists use to create space.
You said what's the second one?
The foreground, middle ground, and receding ground. And just by way of a preview, the simplest way to create a sense of space is to overlap one thing over another, right? Here we have it. He did a lot of overlapping. These figures overlap each other, so therefore we know this man is closer to us than this man, right? Simple, overlap. Second is relative size. Larger shapes appear closer than do smaller shapes, right? This is not rocket science, this is self-evident, right? Location. Shapes that are in the foreground, closer to the bottom of the picture plane, are always going to seem closer to you, simply because they're lower in the picture plane. Shapes that are higher in the picture plane, even though they might be the same size, because they're higher in the picture plane, they're going to seem further away from you. And then we have the concept of atmospheric and linear perspective that are not quite as applicable here. Seurat is depending on overlapping, relative size, and location to create this sense of foreground, middle ground, and receding ground.
What is that type of photo like? What is it like? Like just looking at it, it's like what?
Okay, photo.
Right.
This is really a painting, but it's a overlay, a little kind of shape analysis that has been probably done with Photoshop to help us understand the placement of the figures. I hope I'm answering the question. Okay, let's keep going. What about that?
Looking at the painting, we can see soft colors, many pastels. Yet Seurat didn't use such a palette. He only used a small range of colors, applied in tiny dots, which are optically blended. How does this work? Instead of mixing colors on a palette, his technique relies on the ability of the human eye and mind to blend the separate dots of color, in order to create a more vivid and luminous effect. Seurat is seen as the inventor of this technique, called pointillism. If we take a look at some details, it's not that hard to imagine the amount of time it took to apply all those dots, a calculated juxtaposing of colors, on this monumental canvas. As said before, Seurat started the Sunday on La Grande Chatte in 1884 and didn't finish it before 1886. Another special feature of this painting is the innovative use of complementary colors, colors that are opposite each other on the color wheel. Seurat didn't just use the conventional opposition of dark and light to enhance colors and to depict lighting and shading, but also by juxtaposing complementary colors. Let's take a look at the detail of contrasting lighting and shading in the grass. It's a great example of Seurat's use of complementary colors. The lighted and shaded area have a dark green in color, but the lighted section further consists of a lighter green and yellow. Meanwhile, the shaded area consists of red and blue. In the wheel of color, the used yellow and green are analogous. but complementary to the blue and red. Another beautiful example can be found in a woman holding a parasol. Her skirt exists of pink and orange, yet it casts a blue shadow. Seurat's color practice was greatly influenced by several color theorists, for example the contemporary chemist Michel-Eugène Gevreux, who researched the principles of color contrasts. Despite the intended luminous effect of the colors, the painting has a somewhat static character. Even though there is activity in the painting, the placing of the figures translates into a formal stiffness. A note of criticism was that Seurat only depicted the figures sideways or straight on, like rigid toy soldiers, or like in ancient art. The stoic character might have been critiqued. The influence of ancient art was recognized by contemporary critics. As Seurat himself said, he intended to make modern people in their essential traits move about as they do on ancient Greek friezes and place them on canvases organized by harmonies, thereby seeking a sense of timelessness, a sense of permanence. He specifically referred to the Parthenon frieze by Phidias, which was initially praised in Athens, Greece. A Sunday on La Grande Jatte was first shown in 1886 at the 8th and last Impressionist exhibition. The painting embraced, but also challenged several ideals of the Impressionist movement. It shows an ongoing Impressionist influence in use of color and light, visible brushstrokes, and subjects, yet it displays divergent choices in size, composition, and technique. Unlike the Impressionist tradition, Seurat didn't paint a spontaneous picture, capturing a fleeting moment. He chose a more academic approach. He did extensive preparatory studies and took his time to work on the canvas in the studio. He departed from the loose brushstrokes and applied calculated dots of color. This method allowed him to paint a more complex, large-scale composition. A Sunday on La Grande Jatte marks the start of a new direction in avant-garde painting, which thanks to art critic Félix Fénéon came to be known as New Impressionism. The scene depicts various characters in different activities, men and women, young and old, of different social classes, soldiers and boaters. The figures are sitting or standing, chatting, strolling, parading, or just gazing forward. What does Seurat want to tell us with this picture? The painting seems to be a coherent unity, though the scene is not readily explained. What are the relationships between the different figures? Does Seurat want to make a point by depicting different social classes side by side? Why is there a monkey present? According to the Art Institute of Chicago, by some, A Sunday on La Grande Jatte is interpreted as a depiction of the growing middle class at leisure, but by others as a representation of social tensions between different social classes who hang out in the same public places, but do not interact. Supporters of the alleged social commentary say Seurat used several symbols. The monkey would represent a prostitute. In French, a female monkey is called a zongeesse, which could also be used in reference to a prostitute. Some also suggest that an earlier work, The Bathers of Asnières, is to be considered as a pendant. In The Bathers of Asnières, Seurat depicted the opposite side of the river, the bank in the suburbs of Asnières, where the working class resides. This portrayal of casual real life would then contrast the bourgeois artificiality in A Sunday on La Grande Jatte. Though we can't be sure of the intended meaning, we can state that The Sunday on La Grande Jatte is a key work in art history, announcing a new direction known as New Impressionism. What makes The Sunday on La Grande Jatte such a remarkable painting is the scientific approach and the balancing between apparent contradictions, such as tradition and innovation, modernity and timelessness. Seurat achieved his particular ideals and technique at a very young age. He was 26 when he finished A Sunday on La Grande Jatte. Unfortunately, because of his early death, his oeuvre is not so extensive. Still, I'd like to share my personal favorite, Le Chalut. Thank you for watching this video by Art History Online. I hope you've enjoyed it. Feel free to like, comment, or check out the other videos.
you should have the PowerPoint back now.
Yes,
Alana.
it is.
Okay. All right, so we took a little time to explore who was George Seurat. And maybe in your notes on your study guide, there is a little section where you can write some notes because he has introduced the element of color to us. And after looking at probably his most famous work, The Sunday Afternoon on La Grande Jatte, we may be able to understand what this quote means a little more. The word harmony. Harmony is about things that have something to do with one another. We all love harmony, don't we? We think about harmonious lifestyles. We think about people that we have harmony with. We would like to have harmony in our home, I would think. We don't always have that, but it is a goal, and things seem to go better when people get along, right? So we usually relate harmony with our personal relationships with other people. Colors can be relational to one another as well. And you can see in that large portrayal of a mixed social class sitting on the riverside on the weekend north of Paris where people love to go. You can see that he was exploring these color relationships, mainly complementary color, yellows and violets, reds and greens, blues and oranges, all dotted together in this process that we call pointillism. Dot, 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 dot. No blending. No blending. Took him 2 years to create this painting. And it was a very methodical, scientific approach to understanding the theorist Chevreul, who you saw shown up to the right-hand corner of the screen. He was the great color theorist of the day that these artists were listening to. And so now, once again, harmony is the analogy of contrary and of similar elements. Elements of tone, of color, of line, dominated by the dominant key, and under a particular light in gay, calm, or sad combinations. So hopefully you get a little bit better understanding of what he said here, because his painting certainly reflects that he was combining these colors, looking for various tones and keys that would give us different kind of visual, emotional effects as a result of the way they were combined. Color usually does not stand alone, okay? There's usually another color adjoining one color, right? Now, there is such a thing as what we call a monochromatic color scheme. Michael, can you stand up just for a minute?
Yeah.
We're looking at a monochromatic t-shirt using red, violet, OU maroon, if you will, and white. It's just one color, correct? There's probably some other monochromatic, thank you, Michael. There's probably some other monochromatic statements in the room here as well. But when you use just one color, along with black and or white, or any variation of gray, that's called monochromatic. We're soon going to be learning the use of two colors, which we've already discussed, which is usually shown with opposing colors that we call complements, okay? Then we're going to be learning about three colors, which usually show up in a pyramid. Yellow, blue, red. 1, 2, 3, right? The fourth type of color combination is called analogous. And that's where we have colors that are shoulder to shoulder. Yellow, yellow-orange, orange, red-orange, red, red-violet, right? Warm or cool. Yellow, yellow-green, green, blue-green, blue, blue-violet. Those are cool analogous, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4 color combinations are what we enjoy as we look at the world around us. Why is a rose so beautiful? A red rose? Because it's framed by all of those beautiful green leaves. Nature is full of complementary relationships. I love to go out to the mountains to look at those big orange rocks against the blue sky, right? If you look, and my flowers are fixing to start blooming, and I'm going to have beautiful yellow blooms against blue, and against violet. I've got yellow irises and I've got violet irises, right? I mean, I did that purposely. But nature reflects complementary relationships all the time. And designers do the same thing. If you look at the colors of mascots, I come from Louisiana, go Tigers. You know, LSU, yellow and violet, yellow and purple, blue and orange. Christmas, red and green. We use it commercially a lot, as well as naturally in nature. All right, so moving ahead, hopefully now, by understanding a contribution to the world of art made by George Seurat, we see his beautiful Sunday afternoon on Lagrange type. The historian talked a little bit about this time period. Now, underneath George Seurat's name, I'd like you to write down Post-Impressionism. Post, P-O-S-T, means after. Seurat was part of a movement called Post-Impressionism. And Impressionism is spelled just like it sounds, impression, with an ism at the end, okay? Another word for that is called neo, French for new. Okay? New Impressionism.
N-E-O?
N-E-O. Dash Impressionism. So basically what this means is Seurat was part of a movement that came after the big movement called Impressionism. We've already discussed a couple of artists that were part of the Impressionism movement. Renoir, back in chapter 1. Okay? So just to put this in sequence in time, the Impressionism movement occurred in the middle 1800s in France, okay? The Post-Impressionism movement came after that. So we have Le Grand Jatte being created in the later 1800s, okay? Because he was part of a group that followed the great Impressionist painters such as Claude Monet and Renoir and Mary Cassatt and some others that we'll study. Edgar Degas, remember the laundress in chapter 1 by Edgar Degas? He was part of that Impressionism movement, okay? So just to kind of put this in sequence for you. The Neo and the Post-Impressionists, those mean the same thing, were listening to the scientists that were trying to figure out this phenomenon of color. Right? Color is really a phenomenon. It's a scientific phenomenon. If you've been in a physics class, you've studied about the great scientist Isaac Newton, who we think of in relation to discovering gravity. But Isaac Newton was the first person to hold a prism up to the light and see the light rays bent and refracted. And to understand that light is the source of color. So that is what another feather in Isaac Newton's hat, is that he understood the phenomenon, the scientific phenomenon of color. When we have a lot of light, we can see a lot of color. When we have less light, we don't perceive color, right? The greatest time of observing color is at high noon, because that's when we have the greatest amount of light in nature, right? So another thing that the Post-Impressionists were all doing is going out of doors. They were all excited about going out of doors and observing light and color, because it was greater out of doors rather than in a dimly lit studio, okay? The middle 1800s was a great time of revolution in Europe and across the world, and we're talking about the Industrial Revolution, right? A lot of industry, people moving from the farms into the cities to man these factories. factories that were producing machine-made goods, right? All the rage. The smokestacks went up, factories got established, sadly, along the riverways, and pollution didn't start yesterday. Pollution began in the mid-1800s when all these factories started dumping and polluting both the waterways and the air, right? If you've ever been in a history class or a science class, you've studied about the pollution that occurred during this time of great industrial progress. We also had the scientific revolution happening in the middle 1800s. Industry and science, right? And we had great revolution in relation to creative achievements. The camera had been perfected. The printing press had been perfected. Artists could move on and do other things. Technology changes visual art. Technology changed music and literature. So industry, science, and then of course in the middle 1800s we had a great revolution here in the United States by way of the Civil War, all right? So it was an incredible time of change. And so we see Seurat really responding to science and the optics of how we perceive. He didn't want to blend, he wanted to examine how dots of color intermingling together will create another impression from a distance. The eye will mix the color instead of the hand mixing the color, all right? So this painting is just like this incredible scientific experiment of color. Notice on the edge, you see dots of color of red juxtaposed against dots of color of green, and then you'll see an area where perhaps you have a little orange, and then you'll see blue. And notice how this framing device that he put all the way around the canvas shimmers and changes to respond in a complementary way to the color that it's next to. So you get this kind of shimmering, it's called simultaneous contrast, where he's framing the painting by using its complementary color to make it vibrate. Complementary colors. You put a red next to a green, and you're never going to see anything more intense, because those are the two farthest locations. Red is the furthest away from green. It's the most different from green in this wheel of color. You follow me? Therefore, it's going to provide you the most extreme contrast of color. You'll see in the pop art movement, you'll see in advertising, designers will pop the color by putting its complement next to it, because you get this vibration of color, okay? If you put green next to blue-green, I mean, that's lovely, but it's not got that much contrast, right? You gotta get something much different. Just like black and white offers the most extreme value contrast, complementary colors offer us the most extreme color contrast. And so, again, the Grand Jeté. One other thing I'd like to say about this painting that was mentioned in relation, we talked about the subject. The subject is obviously these people gathering at the riverside, and we saw some symbolism, different walks of life, the monkey representing the prostitutes. There are some other references to aristocrats in their top hats, and high fashion of the day, which was the bustle. Did she just have a big behind? No, this is an apparatus that women would wear. God knows who designed this. And what it did, I don't know what it did visually for anyone, but it gave maybe the appearance that your waist was small. Who knows? But it was the height of fashion, right? Men wore coats that came to their knees and these stovetop hats. They would usually carry a cane and they would look very proper and very aristocratic, very wealthy. People cared about what their clothes represented. So they all go to the riverside on the weekend in their Sunday best. We don't do that today. We get a little bit more casual. But here we have our umbrella and our parasol and all of the finery of wealth and what that can say about us, right? Then also we have juxtaposed maybe a working class stiff over here, you know, with his pipe and his leisure. But then we also see strolling along the way children and women and people that are kind of isolated one from another. They're really not interacting very much. But we've got this melting pot of a mixture of society. Suddenly, in the cities, we have farmers that were working in the fields a year earlier, but now they're manning a post at a factory, working 16 hours a day. No child labor laws. Only to go home, drop dead, and do it again the next day. I mean, just not a great lifestyle, you know? But hey, there was money to be made, factories to be staffed, and then we also have the idea of the newly wealthy, all right? Because this was a great time of commerce. And we can go now to the very first time to what we call the department store, okay? And buy our Sunday finery, even though we are a peasant and we work in a factory, we can look like an aristocrat, right? Our clothing can mask our walk of life. You follow me? And that was a whole new thing about French society. The aristocrats with their nose in the air, and you know, the haves and the have-nots. I mean, the French are very proud of their societal ladders, right? But this is a time period where the middle class and the peasants could rise up and suddenly enjoy the benefits of city life in being able to go out and purchase a garment at a department store that elevated them. Do you follow me? And so this industrial revolution helped to create domestic bliss in a way for some people, because they could now furnish their apartment and they could benefit from the societal progress. There were pros, there were cons, right? You saw the alternative of the other side of the river that Seurat painted a few years earlier. The other side of the river was the working class, and you didn't see any Sunday finery. So this is something that it was a leisurely activity that came from the Impressionist movement. But think about it today. We love outdoor cafes. We love going and being able to be in nature on the weekends and when we have leisure time, getting in the outdoors. And people love to go to the riversides along the Seine and other rivers outside of Paris. And so this is kind of a melting pot, if you will, of different levels of society and this experimentation with pointillism. Another word I'd like you to write down is optical mixture. Optical mixture means the eye blends the color and not the hand. The eye will optically mix the colors from a distance so that when you've got dots of blue mingled with dots of green, what are you going to see from a distance? Blue-green. All right? Dots of yellow mixed with dots of red, what are you going to see from a distance? Yellow and red make orange. Okay, so we're going to explore this a little bit more in depth. We've learned quite a bit. And for note-taking purposes, here they are. I'd like you to list, in the last 5 minutes of class, the characteristics of this movement that came before Neo-Impressionism. We can't really study and understand post-impressionism if we don't know what impressionism was, right? So let's back up just a little bit. This is gonna be 5 bonus points for you on the next test. Tell me the characteristics of this very big important movement called Impressionism. We talked about this a little bit when we looked at Renoir's painting of the harbor back in chapter 1. But just for note-taking purposes now, please list. Number 1, open air painting. The French call that plein air. And basically what that means is the artists were going out of doors and capturing nature or cityscapes or the river scene that you just saw. And they had more light. Secondly, broken brush strokes. Broken brush strokes. We don't blend. As we discussed earlier when we looked at Renoir's harbor painting, he kind of had big dabs of paint. Later, George Seurat serialized those into little dots the size of a green pea. When you get to the Art Institute of Chicago and you look firsthand at Seurat's painting, you will see the shapes and the dots of color were uniformly the size of a green pea. And if you've ever cooked any green peas, they're tiny little round peas. And they're about 1/4 of an inch across. That's about the size of those little dots. 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch. Ordinary people doing ordinary things was the genre. You know, I mean, and of course, Le Grand Châtelet, which followed Impressionism. You saw people just hanging out on the edge of the riversides. They were just at leisure, doing what people do when they can relax, right? Ordinary people doing ordinary things. Leisure activities as a new subject for art making, right? Leisure activities. I already talked about optical mixture, no blending, ... And then also the subject of landscape, which really was not considered appropriate subject matter for artists. Landscape just by itself was not important enough. And the big key artists that were part of this movement, and we're going to be looking at every single one of these artists. We've looked at 2 already, very briefly, but Claude Monet, Auguste Renoir, Edgar Degas, Mary Cassatt, who was an American female artist that joined the group, and then Berthe Morisot, who was a French female artist. These are some major hitters, if you will, in that movement that we call Impressionism. And that brings us right up to the end of class. What we'll do at the beginning of class tomorrow, next list, is what then is post-impressionism. All right? We have our basis of impressionism, and we're going to see how post-impressionism builds on that. Okay? So,
Go back to the next last slide.
yeah, It's 12:15, and I wish y'all a good afternoon. And Jillian and William, if y'all stick around just for a minute, we'll schedule a time. Y'all have a great afternoon.
Good day.
You too. Congratulations on your performance on your tests.
Thank you.
we'll go over, you can do that, but I'm sorry, that's what I'll, due to the
I'm thinking it's probably,
many harmonious hues, that's what
Okay.
I said, many.
and you said the glossary words are in our book?
Yeah,
Okay.
and you can just write them in, we'll go over it in class, but,
Okay.
sometimes you can almost make sense of what it must say, I'm sorry about that.
No, no, no,
But
you're
we'll,
good.
we'll go over it and, clarify that,
Okay.
just so that you'll have the full definition. But you can look in the very back of the glossary's there, and you can double check. Those came straight from the glossary, okay?
Okay.
It might be multiple colors or many colors.
Oh, okay.
Got it?
Yes, ma'am.
Hey, Jillian, I have tomorrow afternoon. Y'all,
What time tomorrow?
my time is 2 to 5. Well, actually 2 to 4, because it takes an hour for me to take this test. So, would you have any time available tomorrow afternoon?
I have work at first, so if I leave at 2:30, I should be good.
Okay, you wanna come at 2?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, I've got another person coming at 2. I have 2 computers in the office. So, that should work.
Someone's got their phone plugged in and it's on
Yep,
record.
that's me.
And so, the art office,
Thanks, ma'am.
is just directly to the right as you walk in the building, and the building is right behind the theater.
Okay.
There's a big sculpture out front, and that's where we'll take our test. Okay? And William, how about you? Do you have any time tomorrow afternoon?
I wanna, just a little more further back. I mean, a little more further, yeah, a little more further. Because, I feel like I'm not ready for that test. I don't wanna take the
Did
test.
you work on your study guide? You've been working on your
I don't
study
have a
guide?
study guide. So, did you remember, I wasn't here, Friday.
Yeah, well, the study guide template is on Blackboard. It's a Word document
That's what it is.
on Blackboard, and you need to,
I don't understand it. I don't understand none of it. Like, I don't understand how y'all.
All right, Professor, have a good day.
okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.